In Jeremiah 12:5, God challenges Jeremiah, "If you have run with men and they have tired you out, how will you compete with horses?" God offers you a similar challenge to live a life of biblical discipleship and to build a healthy marriage and a godly family. He never promises it will be easy, but it will always be worth it. Are you ready to run with horses? Hello, this is Norman.
And I'm Susan.
Welcome to Run with Horses. Glad you could join us today. You know, if you follow us, if you've been keeping up with where we are and what we're doing, you know that we have been missionaries in Japan for the last 20 years, and we have not spent a lot of time in the United States. But as of March of this year, we returned to the United States, Wisconsin specifically, to help care for Susan's mom, which means we're asking a lot of questions about life and purpose and meaning and all those kind of things, and what we're supposed to be doing. So today, one of the questions that we've been answering, or trying to answer and asking at least, is what is the work of the ministry? You know, we've been full-time career missionaries for the last 20 years, and perhaps that's what we will continue to do. Perhaps not. That's still in God's hands as He directs us, and that's always in God's hands. But it's important for us to recognize that the work of the ministry is not whether we're a missionary or not, or whether we're a pastor or not, but the work of the ministry is something that all of us are called to. So today we want to kind of look at that question, and maybe you have asked it before. What is the work of the ministry? If you haven't, it's a really good question to ask. If you'd like to comment on this show or to ask questions for us to think about in the future, you can go to our website, www.runwithhorses.net. We'd love to hear from you. So, what is the work of the ministry? If I ask you to tell me what ministry is, what would you say? What do you think most people would typically say?
Probably a pastor, probably a pastor.
Yeah, I think a lot of people see all the things that happen on Sunday, and that's really kind of the limits of the work of the ministry, is whatever you see happening on Sunday, that's ministry. If it doesn't happen on Sunday throughout the week, maybe the pastor is still ministering, but other people are working and they're doing other things. So if you ask the question, who does it? If you see it that way, you're going to have a small pool of people in any given church. It's going to primarily be the pastor, the deacons, the Sunday school teachers, maybe the ushers and song leaders. You could even extend it out to be whoever helps park cars in the parking lot. But if you have a church big enough to need parking attendants, you're still talking about a very small percentage of people who are doing anything on Sunday. So if it's the work of the ministry, we use that word work, does it mean it only counts if you get paid for it? And that's a good question to ask. So we want to look at that. And we'll start by asking the question is, where do you typically get your image of what the work of the ministry is? Where did you always get yours?
Well, I think just growing up in a church from the time you're young, you tend to just see what ministries are available at church and how can I fit into them. So, you look around, and if you're a woman like me, then you obviously can't do certain ministries, but there are plenty of others that the church holds, either like VBS is coming up. There's a myriad of ways to help out with that, or nursery worker, or, Sunday school, things like that. But it's all typically the works that the church puts on. That's what my image of ministry is.
So where did you come up with that image?
I think just from going to church and maybe hearing other people in the church talk about it, or saying, hey, you should get involved, and here's something you could do. Why don't you come join us do this? And that's kind of, for me, it's sort of ingrained. It's my default when I think about doing ministry. And so it's hard for me to think outside of that box. Even being a missionary, in America, I found it easy to minister or serve in a local church because that's what I was used to. But when I went to Japan, all of a sudden we're starting a church basically from scratch, and there aren't any of those ministries. And I was floundering for the longest time because, what do I do? There aren't any predecided ministries that are out there for me. I have to drum them up by myself, kind of a thing. And it was a real paradigm shift, I guess.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I think everybody gets your first ideas of what ministry is from whatever church you go to, and somebody that comes alongside you and says, hey, we need help in this ministry. And that's the way it's worded. So the work of the ministry are all these ministries that the church has. Mm-hmm. And maybe your church bulletin has a list of ministries, and they would list Sunday school workers. They need help in the cemetery to clean things up, or there's all kind of ministries that the church lists as ministries. So it flows from that very naturally that when someone talks about the work of the ministry or ministry, you have in mind these kind of jobs, roles, and it's not that that's wrong. It's just that that's not all there is. And I would go so far as to say that's probably not the main thing. And if that's the main thing, long term, the church is not sustainable if the primary ministry is what we do on Sunday and we don't see the work of the ministry as carrying on throughout the week. So my goal is to help you today to broaden your thoughts of what the work of the ministry is if you haven't thought about it, and if you have, to continue to encourage you to do the work of the ministry. So let's start with, what does the Bible say about the work of the ministry? And one of the passages that people turn to that's really the one that mentions the work of the ministry is Ephesians 4:11-6. And I think we can use this one passage and cover a lot of ground thinking about what the work of the ministry is. And it starts with saying, he gave all these roles that are very similar to what you think about on Sunday. The pastor, the Sunday school teacher. Okay, it doesn't mention a Sunday school teacher. Apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Hey, all of these are things you go, yeah, that's Sunday. That's what people do on Sunday. That's the roles of people who are in church, who are serving. And so all the people being served come. It's like, well, okay, we've already got off the rails here. If you feel like those people are coming to serve you and you're just coming to be served, then we already have problems. Why did God give those? And it tells us there in verse 12, Ephesians 4:11 and 12, for the equipping of the saints for the work of the ministry. So already you can see that if your primary view of the ministry has been all of those roles that are fulfilled on Sunday, the pastor, the teacher, all of those people, yes, they're doing ministry, but their job, their role is to prepare you to do the work of the ministry. And that alone, you realize that's a paradigm shift if you've never thought about ministry as being something other than what they did. No, what they're supposed to do is prepare you to do ministry. That's their role. That's their job. That's what God expects from them. So, the work of the ministry, as they prepare you to do the work of the ministry, that is part of how it goes on to say that the church is edified for the edifying of the body of Christ. This is what the work of the ministry does. It is us edifying and building up each other, encouraging each other, living out the one another's, which we'll come back to in a minute. That's huge when you think about what the work of the ministry is. So when is the first time you think you understood that concept, that they have these roles in the church from apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, Sunday school teachers, and you have their role, but when's the first time you understood that their role is to help everyone to do the work of the ministry?
I'm not sure I ever really learned that. But for me to know what the work of the ministry is, and I mean, not only those things, I think it helped to have children and for us to talk about, because I've been struggling with this question, what should I be doing today, for a very long time, because I didn't always know, how can I do ministry in this phase of my life? And through talking with you, I understood that, discipling our children is a very big ministry that is my responsibility, and I should take that seriously. And just being able to look at that as my main ministry kind of relieved a lot of the stress and pressure that I put on myself, probably I need to be doing mission work. I need to be evangelizing. I need to do this and that. And it's like, I've got kids at home. I have diapers to change, and I just can't do it all. But to realize that even, discipling my children, taking care of them and making them a priority is a work of the ministry. And that was something that I needed to focus on at that phase in my life. So I think that kind of helped start me to thinking about my own situation. But I know it's not really answering your question.
Well, it is kind of. You have that time in life where you recognize that I can't be involved in what I've always considered the work of the ministry, but you felt the need still to be involved in ministry. So you had to question, what is that? It's like, is it something I just can't do because I have these other things going on in life, so I just can't be involved? And I think a lot of people don't ask that question. It should be. That's why we have people that are able to go to the church gathering, the family gathering, and not do anything and feel comfortable doing that because they feel like, I'm not called to serve. I'm not called to ministry in those ways. Therefore, I must be the ones being served. And that's a problem. We think about the health of the church because we're not going to expand it this far today. But if you think about the spiritual gifts, the Bible says that we're given spiritual gifts, and the spiritual gifts work out, like this verse says, so that each person doing their part, it says, verse 16, from the whole body joined and knit together by what every joint supplies, according to the effective working by which each part does its share, causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. So we're all given spiritual gifts that are meant to be used in the work of the ministry. So I know as I've talked to different young people and challenged them to think about how God has called them and how God has equipped them and prepared them to serve, answering that question of what are your spiritual gifts? How has God prepared you to serve the church? Helps you see how the work of the ministry flows out of your life. It flows out of your spiritual growth. So, I've given a lot of spiritual gift inventories over the years, kind of a simple test to kind of help you see where maybe I might have some gifting. And I always tell people, this can't tell you what your spiritual gifts are, but it can tell you maybe a combination of your spiritual and natural gifts. It can tell you what you might be good at, what you might think about. And whether your gifts are spiritual, you've received them at salvation, or they were natural, you were born with them, either way, they came from God. There's no distinction there. They came from the same place. It's the timing, really, and maybe the intent. So the spiritual gifts are more specifically given for the building up of the church. But you know what? Your natural gifts work very well for that too. You should really submit those to God and desire to see Him use your natural gifts to build up the church. So if you lay aside the fact that you can't really know from a spiritual gift inventory what your spiritual gifts are, you can have an idea of what you're good at, what areas you might be able to serve in, and that's a start. Say, how can you use the gifts that you have? How can God use the way that He made you to serve His church, to serve in the mission of reconciliation that He has? So all of us have different strengths and weaknesses. To recognize that and then lay those at God's feet is a huge step forward in understanding what it means to be doing the work of the ministry. So one of the things that I've shared before, when I was like 26, 27, I was struggling with the same kind of thing. What am I supposed to be doing? Up until the time I was 25, 26, I was on the path of studying horticulture and botany and planning to be a professor. So when God began to change my direction, my thinking, I had to ask, what am I supposed to do? I know something about plants. I don't know anything about people. I don't even like people. So how is God going to use me? So I don't know where I got the idea, but one day I took a piece of paper and I wrote down all of my gifts that I knew about, all of my talents, all of my abilities, all of my interests, just everything I could think of that I could do. Well, I grew up, my dad had a cabinet shop, so I knew how to build at least some stuff with wood. Not super great at it, didn't like the detailed work, but I could build something that's going to work, it's functional. So I put down, I could build cabinets, I could build stuff. I put that down. I could ride a unicycle. Hey, I put down, I could ride a unicycle. That's a stupid, worthless skill, but hey, I can do that. And so I just listed, it was about a page, almost a full page, of just different things that either had an interest in doing or that I could do or that, had some skill at. And what I did is just pray through that list and say, God, you gave me this, whether it's the interest, the ability, the skill, you gave it to me. So I am intentionally, consciously giving it back to you. If you can use it, then use it. And to me, that was a great start for figuring out next steps. how can God use me? How does God want to use me? Here are some of the options that I know about right now. And they didn't stop there. You know, what I found is giving that list to God, and really what that is giving your whole life to God. This is everything I can do, God, that I know about. Giving that to God started the process, and I gained a lot of new skills. Because one thing I did not put on that list at that time was public speaking. I absolutely hated it with a passion and avoided it at all cost. And then years down the road, find out, okay, here I'm speaking in churches on pre-field, going to Japan every week for 4.5 years. Just constantly speaking in Sunday schools and Sunday morning services and Sunday night services and Wednesday services. It's like, well, you know what? I got better at it. I don't know if it ever became a really strong skill, but it definitely improved my ability to do it, my comfort with it. And now if I had to do that same list, I would add it to the list as something I can do. I'd have other things that I've added to the list that I can do. That list that I wrote wasn't the end, it was the beginning. As I gave that to God, I think He gave me new things. As He opens doors of ministry and opportunity, He gave me new things. So I encourage you, if you're asking that question, what is the work of the ministry and what am I supposed to be doing? Consider doing that. Sit down and write down all that you can do. You can cook. Okay, write that down. It doesn't matter how silly you think it is. God can use it. He does use those things. And begin to look at the relationships that you have and how do the gifts, skills, and abilities that you have relate to other people. And then that's really where the rubber meets the road in ministry. Ministry is going to be those relational things. They allow you to build relationships. It allows you to point people toward Christ. It allows you to strengthen people, edify people, as the Ephesians 4 chapter talks about. That's really where the work of the ministry is played out. And then, as we mentioned earlier, the one another's are a lot of what that looks like. So we've had a lot of changes recently. I think that's one reason why we're having this conversation and conflict, maybe, because we've had one very clear goal and role in ministry. Mm-hmm. But yes, ministry is all those overt things, pastoring, teaching, all those things, but it's all that, but it's a lot more. We really live out our ministry in relationships, and as life changes, then you have a need and an opportunity to grow in ministry. And I think that's one of the things that we're facing right now is God is giving us an opportunity to grow in ability to serve, to grow in ministry. And I would say, I don't know what you think about that, but that's kind of how I see our position now. God is giving us an opportunity to expand our ministry.
Yeah, it's interesting because now we're back in America. And, the 20 years before we lived in America and we were used to ministry here. And since we've been away, I feel like I've changed or, I view things differently. So coming back and, I've gained other skills along the way. I'm coming to the church body in a different place than I was before. And maybe, living with you and hearing your discipling talk and your convictions about things has helped me to understand what is important and what is valuable in investing in relationships over just being a part of a program or teaching a lesson instead of, and helping a person. And so I feel like I'm in a different place than I would have been if maybe I stayed in America the whole time. But not sure where I was going with that.
Well, it's true. We grow over time. Whether you stay in one place or whether, as we went halfway around the world, if you're growing, you're changing. So you continually look at maybe the church differently, your role differently, ministry differently. You should look at lost differently. Should grow in our ability to express compassion. That should be part of the process that we do learn and grow and change. Just in our case, it has been maybe more extreme than a lot of people face. We've seen cultural differences, and we've had to change so much just to adjust to a different life
Yeah, it's interesting, too, to look at my mother because she's in her 80s now, and she was very active in her church all throughout my whole growing up years and all these years. But even just getting to the age where you can't do as much as you used to, or if you have a life-altering, accident that, takes away part of your, bodily abilities, like you can't walk anymore or you can't see. I mean, it doesn't mean that your ministry is just over and you can't do anything ever again that can encourage somebody or to reach out to somebody. So, I mean, sometimes these limitations enter our lives, and to be able to see, okay, this is my new normal, and how can I serve God with what I have now in this place? And that's a valuable thing to consider and realize that even though you have limitations, it doesn't mean it's over.
Yeah, and that does constantly change. And I think a good thing that you said in there, at least that I got out of part of that, is really you have every day and you have who you are today. Yeah. And that does change. Mm-hmm. There are times in life when that changes in a really good way. Hey, you have more ability, you have greater faith, you have new skills, so you're growing in your ability to do ministry. But if you live long enough, that kind of contracts. So it expanded during the early part of your life. Mm-hmm. It begins to contract as you have maybe less energy. If you hit a certain point in life, you don't have the energy that you had before. You don't have the physical abilities that you had before. I could probably still ride a unicycle today, but it's a little more dangerous today than it would have been, 20 or 30 years ago. I could fall off and I didn't break anything. Today, I'm starting to get to the point where I'm not sure I really want to fall off those things too anymore. So it changes your view of life, your view of ministry. So I think it's a valid point and an important thing to recognize is that I only have what I have today. Mm-hmm. There may be things that I'm developing. I want to get better at some skills. Awesome. I don't have them yet, but I want to be working on those. What do I have today? And God gives opportunities that suit who you are and what you have today. And that's an important thing to recognize. Mm-hmm. So as we evaluate where we are and who we are, one of the questions is how do we best use our times, efforts, spiritual gifts, and all of those kind of things. And one of the questions that I often think about is we have a box that we're in. You grew up in a church, and the church has a box, and this is what you're supposed to do. And if you don't put yourself in it, often the church does. So one of the questions is, when you ask the question, what is ministry? And the church gives you this box, how do you break out of that box? Do you have any thoughts? Or you've expressed that you struggle with the box and the idea that ministry is more than that. How do you get out of that?
Well, I think just being able to talk it over with a Christian friend who doesn't always only limit every ministry to the box is helpful. Like talking to you, even this morning when we went out together, we were discussing this, and to realize that I can just look around at what relationships I have or the people that I see or the needs around me and think, how can I fill that? Not only look at what can I do on Sunday at church, or do I have to only work there, but to see and realize that people are what is so important to God, so valuable. And really, anytime that we are looking at people and building relationships and investing in them and trying to encourage them spiritually, I mean, that is the work of the ministry. And too often I just kind of poo-poo that and think, oh, that's not really ministry. Or I think sometimes too, at least for me, I've gotten sort of a fulfillment feeling from being busy at church. Like if I'm really busy, then I must be doing something. And you get sort of a satisfaction from just playing piano or helping out in this or that. And, it's good to find joy in serving others and ministering, but it's also wise, I think, to evaluate, is this really useful for eternity? Is playing the piano in a church service, is that the best use of my time? I mean, maybe on Sunday it is, but if that, that's my whole ministry is just that, and it's not really, building relationships, it's a good question to ask. Is this really the best use of my time and energy?
Yeah, I think it's helpful for me to look at Jesus. He's always our example of what it means to serve, of what it looks like. And he really loved people. I think even of the woman at the well, he looked at her and he served her. And it did expand to other people, But it began with he approached her. He was there for her. That's one person. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we look at the one person and go, well, I'm not sure it's worth it.
Right.
Well, you don't know when that one person opens the door to a family or a community. Mm-hmm. You don't know when that is. Jesus did, but we don't. He valued the one. You know, when he looked at Zacchaeus and said, Zacchaeus, come down out of that tree. I'm going to your house today. That's one person he chose out of the crowd to focus on. And sometimes we're too busy focusing on the crowd. Because, you know, the Bible doesn't mention all the other people that were around Zacchaeus that were clamoring for his attention, that were there and that were hangers on. He looked and picked out one. Said, hey, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to you. That's valuable. I think we need to encourage each other in the church to look for the one. Because no matter where you are in the church, there's one. There's always one that you can invest in. There's always one that you can encourage. There's always one that you can build up. You may not be asked to lead the ladies' Bible study. You may not be asked to lead the Wednesday night service. But you can pick out the one who will respond, and you can give them everything you have. And I think that's always going to be worth it. Too often we, in America particularly, lean toward the bigger and the better and the more, when I think a lot of the value is the small, the few, the 2 and 3. You know, Jesus spent most of his time with 2 and 3 disciples. And then the 12, he did spend time with thousands of people, but he had really invested in a handful, and that's where the church came from. It didn't come from the thousands who were talked to. It came from the few who really grasped it and then passed it on. That's why disciple making is so important. And that's also why it's not that hard. You don't have to have a huge lesson plan. You don't have to teach 50 people. You have to be willing to see the one that God is working in. And you have to be willing to give the one time, because it is relational. It takes time. So I believe ministry is found whenever I submit my will to God's and whenever I surrender myself to be used. And sometimes that's with 10, 20, 50. Sometimes it's with one. And to really recognize the value of the one, I think that's where we often err. The one another's are not really lived out in large groups. They're lived out in one-on-one relationships. And they're important. God loves the one. He loved me. He died for you. So our goal should be to commit to really serve him with all of our life. And I pray that you do that today. Thanks for joining us today. If you have a question we can address on the show, or just want to send us a word of encouragement, send an email to talk@runwithhorses.net. That's TALK@runwithhorses.net. We look forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, keep running.